what's the difference between rod action and rod power, and more importantly, how to choose a rod that is right for you and the type of lures and line that you use. All right, here we go. First, let's start off with defining what rod power is. Rod power is simply the amount of pressure needed to put on a rod in order to make it bend. So when you hear words like ultralight, light, medium, medium heavy, heavy, extra heavy, these are all referring to rod power. And the reason it's important to know the rod power is because you're gonna have to match it to the line and lure that you're using. For example, you wouldn't use a 65-pound test braid with a hollow body frog on an ultralight power rod. You simply is going to have too much bend. You're not going to be able to transfer enough power to the hook set, and you're never going to be able to pin that bass. And on the flip side, you wouldn't use a 4-pound test line on an extra heavy rod fishing a chatterbait, because whenever a bass would hit that, when you would set the hook, you would literally snap your line because you're transferring too much power. And now let's talk about fishing rod action, how this is different than fishing rod power. So fishing rod action is telling you where along the rod shaft it is going to bend. So when you hear words like fast, extra fast, moderate, slow, it's referring to when on the rod blank it starts to bend. So you're extra fast, it's going to be right out here. You get to fast, it's going to bend around here. You get moderate right here, and slow, it's going to start bending in right around the middle of your shaft. So why this is important is because as you get closer to where your hand is, there's more power in the shaft because it doesn't bend at all. And as you get further out toward the tip, the power diminishes. Essentially what happens if it's an extra fast action, it bends out here on the tip, and what you're doing is deflecting power closer to the bottom of the rod blank where it's more powerful. So let's talk about the real world applications and what type of line and lures you would use with each type of rod action and rod power. The power and action of your rod should be informed by the lines and lure that you're using. So if you're using really light lures, say 1/16 ounce on a 4-pound test line, you're gonna want something that's more bendy or has a ultralight type of setup, ultralight power. Because you don't want, with 4-pound test line, this thing to be really stiff. When you set the hook or when that fish is fighting, you want this to act as your shock absorber, not your fishing line. And on the flip side, this is a medium heavy casting rod. This isn't going to bend a whole lot because it is designed to transfer a lot of power to set this big hook into the lips of that largemouth bass, and if necessary, to fight it out of heavy cover. As you can see between these two hooks, one is super small. This is an Aberdeen hook used for putting a worm on it and catching some bluegill. This is a bladed jig, which has a giant hook on it, as you can see. The wire gauge is much thicker. I'm gonna use this when using a light, ultra light setup. Whenever I fish this type of lure, I'm gonna want I think I have 65-pound braid on a medium heavy. So extra fast and fast action rods are gonna do a few things for you. They're gonna provide great sensitivity for you. If you're new to fishing, sensitivity is your ability to feel through the rod a bite on your lure. So if you're using a really extra fast, a heavy power rod with a 65-pound braid per se, you're gonna have high sensitivity. You're gonna be able to feel everything that lure is knocking into at the bottom of the water. And on the flip side, if you're using a high stretch line like monofilament on a slow action rod, a bendy one, you are gonna have low sensitivity, which is why we have things like bobbers. So when do you use light action rods? Really, you wanna use light action rods whenever you just wanna keep the fish on. A great example of this would be a crankbait. When a bass hits a crankbait, they usually hook themselves, and you want your rod to act as a shock absorber to keep that fish on so they can't throw your hook. And when do you want to use fast action rods? Well, whenever you want to transfer as much power as you possibly can. So some great real world applications to this is when you're using jerk baits, top waters, you're frogging, you're jigging. These would be perfect examples when you want a faster action rod. And if you don't know how to fish your frogs, your Senkos, your drop shots, your crankbaits, or any other lure I might have mentioned, I have an entire playlist devoted to helping you dial those in so you can catch more and bigger fish right there.